Hay told you never to look too closely into the earth. They told you that the mines were only for coal, only for stone, only for the sweating hands of men whose lives ended in blackened lungs and broken backs. But what if I told you that some mines were built not to take from the earth, but to bury something inside it? Tonight, you and I will descend together. But understand this. Once you hear what was hidden beneath Illinois in 1843, you will never climb back out again. Like, subscribe, and leave a comment telling me where you're watching this from, because this is not just history. This is contagion. The story begins with 27 men. Not criminals, not priests, not soldiers. Miners, working men with calloused palms, faces carved by hunger and fire. They entered a shaft in Illinois, a shaft that, by all accounts, should never have been dug. It wasn't on any map. It wasn't ordered by any company. And yet the men swore they were paid in advance by a figure none could later identify. Some said it was a woman dressed in mourning black. Others swore it was a man without a face. The records are dust, the witnesses long gone, but the whole remains sealed, hidden beneath fields that farmers refused to plow. The shaft went deep, too deep for the tools they carried. And the miners wrote in their crude journals that the deeper they went, the warmer the air became, until the walls dripped with moisture like the breath of something alive. Animals refused to follow them. Horses broke their harnesses. Dogs whined at the edges of the pit. And the men, though paid in gold heavier than any they had seen before, began to whisper that this was not mining. This was a descent. The first week was only stone, black shale, wet earth, the bitter taste of sulfur. But on the seventh day, their pickaxes struck something that did not sound like rock. A hollow echo carried back up the shaft. They dug faster, greed spilling into their muscles, until the wall opened to reveal a cavern not carved by men, but by something older. The space inside was so vast their lanterns could not catch the ceiling. And etched into the walls were symbols, circles within circles, spirals descending into sharp points, marks that resembled neither native glyphs nor Christian signs. They had unearthed a chamber no one was meant to touch. The journals grow fractured from that point. Some lines are scrawled in trembling hands, others scratched as though the writer was carving words in the dark. One phrase repeats across 3 different notebooks. The door is breathing. No explanation, no description, only that refrain, the door is breathing. And when the 27th man wrote it, his ink had bled across the page, as if his lantern had gone out, and his hand had written by memory alone. That night, in the taverns of the nearby town, the miners did not appear. Their wives waited. Their children asked questions. But the mine stayed quiet, except for one man, one who staggered out of the shaft near dawn, covered not in coal dust, but in ash. His skin was blistered. His clothes clung to him as if they had melted. He could not speak, only point back toward the shaft. And then, before the villagers' eyes, he fell to his knees and screamed. Not a scream of pain, but a sound that witnesses swore did not belong to any human throat. And when he collapsed, the air smelled of burning hair and iron. The villagers sealed the shaft. They buried it under timber, stone, and prayers whispered through trembling lips. But sealing is not destroying. You and I both know that the earth does not forgive trespass. Something had been opened, and though the shaft was closed, the questions remained. Where did the 26 others go? Why did their names vanish from records, their families disappear from census rolls, their homes abandoned? And most chilling, what was the door that breathed beneath Illinois in 1843? The deeper we peer, the more the earth seems less like stone and more like a prison. Think about it. Humanity has always buried what it cannot control. Bodies, secrets, relics. If a thing was too dangerous, we did not burn it, we buried it. Which means that every mine, every sealed shaft, every cavern in this world might not just be natural, it might be a lock. And the men of Illinois may have broken one. Local legends whispered of sounds that lingered long after the mine was sealed. Farmers claimed their cattle refused to graze near the field. Shepherd boys swore they heard voices, low, grinding chants, seeping through the soil at night. And one priest, whose diary was confiscated by his church, wrote that the earth itself was stained by the miners' descent. He begged that the field be salted, burned, consecrated. Instead, the parish sold the land to a wealthy family, one whose fortune grew obscenely fast, though no one ever saw their faces in the daylight. But let's stay with those miners. 27 souls who went down, one who crawled back, blistered, broken, no longer speaking with a human voice. That number, 27, has haunted secret histories for centuries. The Druids spoke of 27 gates to the underworld. Ancient Sumerian texts describe 27 demons bound beneath the sands. And in early Christian heresies, there are warnings of 27 seals. Each one, if broken, would unchain something primordial. Was it coincidence? Or did the faceless patron who paid those miners know exactly what he was buying? The journals that survived tell us something even more sinister. One page, written in Latin, not by the miners themselves but scrawled between their notes, describes a ritual of descent. It speaks of blood carried down, names abandoned, lights swallowed, until the chamber opens. But the most disturbing part isn't the words, it's the handwriting. Scholars who studied it in the 1920s claimed it matched no ink or paper available in 1843. In other words, something was writing through them across decades, across materials, across time. And yet, the most terrifying evidence is not what was found in the journals, but what was found in the ground itself. In 1911, when workers attempted to dig wells near that same field, they struck through black stone that cracked open to reveal teeth. Not fossils, not bones. Teeth, human teeth, fused into rock, as if countless jaws had been pressed together and buried alive. And the workers who saw them? Every single one quit within a week. None ever spoke publicly again. This is not just folklore. This is a contagion of silence. Whole families vanished from records, censuses scrubbed, property deeds burned. The 27 miners became not men, but warnings. Warnings buried under the illusion of cold dust. Yet, silence is never perfect. Whispers survived, carried down from the trembling wives who were told their husbands never existed, to the children who grew up hearing lullabies that sounded more like warnings. Never dig where the earth exhales. But you're listening now. You're digging now. And once you hear the next truth, you'll understand why silence was the only thing keeping the door shut. What does it mean when the earth exhales? The miners called it the breathing door, but they were not poets. These were men hardened by soot, accustomed to silence broken only by picks against stone. And yet, every one of their journals, scattered, damaged, hidden away in attics and archives, repeats the same image, a pulse in the cavern wall, as if the rock itself inhaled and exhaled, slow and patient, like some colossal lung. Imagine working in the dark, your lantern trembling, your ear pressed to stone, and feeling it move, not with the shifting of earth, not with the tremor of collapse, but with a rhythm steady and alive. The one survivor never spoke in words again, but the children of the town remembered his screams. They said he shrieked not of fire, but of drowning, as if, in that chamber, the air itself had thickened into something you could choke on. A priest recorded that when the man's body was prepared for burial, his lungs were black not with coal, but with fluid, like he had inhaled the breath of something that did not belong to our world. Some modern historians dismiss it all as hysteria. They claim the journals were forgeries, the testimonies exaggerated. But tell me, how do you dismiss teeth embedded in stone? How do you explain census pages ripped from archives, names replaced with ink smears, deeds transferred to owners who never appeared in photographs? Suppression leaves fingerprints. And in 1843, someone powerful decided this story was not to be remembered. But the miners remembered, or at least their descendants did. Decades later, their children told stories of fathers who had gone underground and never returned. They whispered that those who went too deep were not lost, but claimed. The word claimed repeats in oral traditions across continents, from Irish bog sacrifices to Mesopotamian pits of sacrifice. Claimed by what? Not by God, not by devils, but by something older, something humanity was never meant to name. When archaeologists later returned to Illinois in the 1930s, they found a sealed shaft under layers of stone. But they also found something the villagers had never mentioned, a second entrance. Narrower, hidden, carved not by tools, but by something sharper, smoother, intentional. A tunnel that led not downward, but outward, as if whatever was beneath had begun to carve its way up. That second shaft was filled with bones. Not whole skeletons. No, these are fragments. Jawbones with teeth worn flat. Finger bones sharpened to points. And most disturbingly, skulls with the crowns split open, hollowed from within. The archaeologists sealed it again, their report buried in university archives. But one of them, a man named Whitaker, kept his personal notes. He wrote of standing at the mouth of the second shaft and hearing something. Not voices, not echoes. A sound like a massive heartbeat, faint but constant, deep within the rock. He ended his journal with one sentence that makes my skin crawl even now. The earth is not solid. It is skin. Whitaker disappeared in 1937. His home was found abandoned, his papers burned, except for the one notebook hidden under a loose floorboard. His family never spoke of him again. And so the question lingers, growing heavier with every scrap of evidence. What exactly did those miners uncover? Was it a natural cavern that breathed with shifting air currents? Or had they broken into a chamber that was never meant to be seen, never meant to be opened? A chamber that was alive? There is a pattern buried in our world, one most people never notice. Across continents, across centuries, the ground swallows men in groups of 27. In 1621, 27 prisoners vanished in a Spanish silver mine in Bolivia. In 1714, 27 monks disappeared beneath the limestone caves of southern France. In 1843, it was Illinois. Each time, the records bend. Names vanish. Reports conflict. The official stories blame collapse, fire, plague. But always the same number. 27. This cannot be coincidence. The ancients believed that 27 was not just a number, but a key. In Hindu cosmology, 27 nakshatras mark the lunar mansions, paths through the night sky by which spirits travel. In Mayan prophecy, 27 was the cycle of descent, the spiral into Xibalba, the underworld. And in forbidden Christian texts, 27 was the number of steps Christ descended into hell before rising again. The pattern repeats over and over, a drumbeat through human history. And each time, 27 lives are erased. The miners of Illinois were not the first to be swallowed, and they were not the last. The survivors, if you can call them that, always return broken, unrecognizable, stripped of speech, stripped of memory, as if something had hollowed them out and left only the shell. And their silence becomes a contagion. Families collapse. Villages empty. Archives burn. Until all that remains is rumor, myth, the trembling memory of a door that should never have been opened. But think deeper. If these events are connected, if 27 is a key, if the caverns are locks, then what is buried beneath us? What requires so many seals, so many sacrifices to keep it contained? And why, in the 19th century, did someone with wealth and power hire men to dig where no mine was meant to exist? The figure who paid those miners was never identified, but rumors lingered. A woman in black, veiled, who carried gold minted not in America, but in Europe. A man with a face hidden in shadow, whose voice never rose above a whisper. Some swore they saw both. Two patrons, never standing together, always described in contradictory ways. But here is the detail that chills me most. Every witness, though they disagreed on appearance, described one thing identically. The patron's breath smelled of sulfur. If they were human, they were not ordinary. If they were emissaries, they were not from above. The miners believed they were hired for work, but perhaps they were offerings. Perhaps 27 men were purchased, their lives exchanged for a ritual far older than industry, older than Illinois, older than the nation itself. And when the villagers sealed the mine, when the priests prayed, when the families wept, the question was never whether the miners had died. It was whether they had been consumed. Because sometimes death is not an end. Sometimes it is a doorway. And the door beneath Illinois was still breathing. Imagine standing on soil that has been salted, burned, consecrated, prayed over, and yet still it pulses with a faint exhale. That was Illinois in the years after 1843. Farmers swore their crops grew too fast in the field above the shaft. Corn rising in grotesque spirals, stalks too thick to cut, kernels rotting black before harvest. Cattle gave birth to calves with twisted spines. Chickens laid eggs with shells so thin they collapsed at touch. And all the while, the people whispered. They whispered that the miners had not died, that they had become something else. The priests could not control the rumors. One parishioner's diary mentions secret gatherings at night, where widows of the miners circled the field and pressed their ears to the earth. They claimed they could hear their husbands calling from beneath, faint voices repeating their names. But here's the detail that freezes the blood. When they described the voices, none of them said the words were pleas for help. They said the voices were inviting them, enticing them, telling them to come down. The church denounced it as hysteria. They issued threats of excommunication. But fear has a way of curdling into curiosity. People began sneaking to the field at night, families passing torches hand to hand, children daring one another to stand at the shaft. And some nights, they swore the ground was warm. Not summer warmth, something deeper, as if the field itself was feverish. Decades later, in 1891, a traveling physician named Horace Gray documented the strange afflictions of the local families. He noted that the descendants of the miners all shared peculiar features: unusually dark eyes, heightened sensitivity to sound, and a tendency towards sleepwalking. Many were found wandering the fields at night, barefoot, staring at the soil as if listening. Gray's records were dismissed as pseudoscience, and yet every one of his patients vanished from census rolls within a generation. And the field itself? It was sold, resold, traded through shadowy deals until it landed in the hands of a family whose fortune was never traced to any visible work. They fenced it, guarded it, forbade entry. And yet villagers whispered that on certain nights, always during eclipses, the sound of chanting carried from beyond the wooden posts. The family denied it, but children swore they saw lights flickering beneath the soil, like lanterns moving in tunnels that no longer existed. This is where the story twists, because evidence suggests the shaft was not abandoned at all. Someone, somewhere, kept digging. Not for coal, not for stone, but for passage. And when you remember the second shaft found in the 1930s, filled with bones sharpened to points, you begin to realize something. The miners may not have been lost. They may have been transformed into guardians. Guardians of a door that no one was meant to open, yet that someone has been prying at for centuries. And what happens when you prod a door that breathes? It breathes deeper. It is said that silence is not empty, but full of answers. That silence was heavy over Illinois after the miners vanished, but it was not stillness. It was expectation, like a breath being held. Every witness who stood near that shaft described a pressure in the air, an invisible weight that made the chest ache, the ears ring, the mind falter. Some fainted. Others swore they lost time, standing at the shaft for minutes that became hours. One woman was found staring into the sealed earth until her eyes bled. She never spoke again. The pattern is familiar to anyone who studies sacred sites. Ancient temples from Mesopotamia to Mesoamerica were built over caverns. Shrines were raised on fissures where the earth's breath seeped upward. The ancients knew that the ground itself was not inert. It was alive, reactive, and sometimes hungry. And the miners of 1843 stumbled onto one such place without the rituals, without the safeguards, without the blood offerings meant to keep the balance. Which brings us to the most disturbing theory, that their disappearance was not accidental, but arranged. If the patrons who paid them knew of the 27 seals, if they knew of the breathing door, then the miners were not laborers. They were sacrifices. Their descent was not for coal. It was for unlocking. And the survivor, blistered, broken, screaming with a voice that did not belong to him. He was never meant to leave. His escape was a fracture in the ritual, a flaw. And flaws have consequences. For years after, people in nearby towns reported shadows moving across their walls at night, shadows that did not match the furniture, shadows that shifted when no one was there. Children woke from nightmares, clawing their beds, claiming their fathers were calling them underground. And those who tried to leave the region often came back days later with no memory of where they had gone, only dirt beneath their fingernails and a faint reek of sulfur clinging to their clothes. Historians pretend none of this exists. Records are shredded. University archives lock away the journals. But whispers survive in lullabies, in curses, in the unmarked graves of families who vanished whole. And when you piece them together, a picture begins to form. Illinois was not an accident. It was a site chosen for a reason. A lock to be broken, a seal to be undone. And the question is no longer what happened in 1843. The question is how many doors like it remain, sealed under fields, churches, and homes you and I walk past every day. Because if 27 was the price to open one, what will be the price to open them all? Patterns are not accidents. They are fingerprints of design. When you trace the trail of vanished groups, miners in Illinois, prisoners in Bolivia, monks in France, you begin to see a lattice of intention stretching across continents. And here is the thread that binds them. Every site rests above a geological scar, a place where the earth splits open, where heat and pressure move unnaturally close to the surface. To scientists, these are faults, fissures, vents. To those who understand older tongues, they are mouths. Illinois was one such mouth. When the miners broke through into that cavern, they had not struck an empty void. They had pried open lips that had long been sealed shut. The breath they described, the pulsing wall, the heat that blistered the lone survivor. All of it speaks not to dead stone, but to something living, something that waits. And when the villagers sealed the shaft, when priests muttered their incantations, all they did was stitch flimsy cloth across a wound that cannot heal. Here's what makes the story even darker. Researchers in the 1970s stumbled on seismic readings that suggested activity beneath the Illinois field. Small tremors, rhythmic, steady like a drumbeat. Not chaotic as earthquakes are, but pulsed. And when those tremors were mapped against recordings from other sites, the caves in France, the silver mine in Bolivia, the intervals matched, as though each site was part of a single body, shuddering in unison. The miners, in their journals, had no words for this. They only drew circles, over and over, spirals tightening inward, sometimes with small symbols clustered around the edges, shapes that resemble teeth, eyes, claws. And always at the center, a black void inked so heavily the paper tore through. If this was madness, it was not isolated. Madness repeated across decades, across men who had never seen one another, across continents where no language was shared. What does it mean when madness is universal? It means there is a truth too terrible to name, and it seeps through the cracks like steam, marking those who come too close. The people of Illinois carried that madness for generations. Families who lived nearest the field reported children who woke in the night speaking languages no one taught them. Farmers buried livestock in mass graves after animals mutilated themselves against fences as if trying to escape something unseen. And in town records, there is one chilling entry, dated 1864. The earth spoke. We told it we would not listen, but the children hear it still. This is not just a story of 27 miners. It is a story of the human race standing on ground that sometimes whispers back. And when it does, the silence is worse than the sound, because silence means it is listening. The whispers spread far beyond Illinois. Newspapers at the time ran a single brief notice: explosion in local mine. 27 lost. No details, no follow-up. But the event reached ears it was never meant to reach. Private letters and archives reveal that within months, European societies were discussing the disappearance. The Society of the Golden Dawn in London, the Bavarian Order of the Black Star, even clandestine branches of the Catholic Church, all referencing the door in America. Why would secret orders care about a collapsed mine in the Midwest? Because they recognized the pattern. They had read the forbidden texts, the maps of 27 seals, the warnings scratched into parchment by trembling monks. To them, Illinois was not random. It was confirmation, proof that the old locks were weakening. Documents smuggled from those societies described the same ritual. 27 chosen, blood spilled underground, a chamber opened. Some texts claim it is a test. Those who pass return changed, bearing knowledge or power. Others whisper it is not a test, but a trade, lives offered in exchange for whispers of whatever breathes behind the door. But all agree on one truth. The ritual is never finished, because something always slips, always escapes, leaving the survivors hollowed and the world a little darker. And Illinois was no different. The survivor who screamed with a voice that was not his. He was not a man who lived, but a vessel that leaked. Through him, something bled into the world. And if his body carried that contagion, then so too did the earth where the others were taken. The secret orders knew this. That is why the land changed hands, why fortunes swelled from nowhere, why guards patrolled a barren field as though it were a palace of gold. Because power was there, not the gold of miners, but the gold of silence, the wealth of controlling access to what lay beneath. The family who owned that field did not farm it. They harvested fear. They harvested secrecy. And perhaps they harvested whispers. For in 1902, a local child disappeared near the fence. Weeks later, his shoes were found on the field, perfectly intact, clean, as though placed carefully on the soil. His family swore they heard his voice in their home for years afterward, calling their names from the walls, from the cellar, from beneath the floorboards. His parents left town. The house burned. But the neighbors remembered, and their children remembered, and the story passed down like an infection. The ground does not let go. So ask yourself, what is being fed? What is being kept alive beneath the field in Illinois and all the other fields, mines, and caverns that whisper with the same pulse tremors? The orders know. The families who own those lands know. The priests who burned their own diaries knew. And if we dare listen long enough, perhaps we will know too. The human instinct is always to dig. We dig for water, for metal, for oil, for graves. But sometimes digging is not discovery. Sometimes it is trespass. The people of Illinois learned that too late. And yet, curiously, the digging did not stop. In 1928, a team of surveyors mapping coal veins stumbled onto the field once more. Their equipment registered cavities where none should exist. They wrote of hollow spaces beneath the ground, perfect ovals, as though carved by intention rather than geology. The survey ended abruptly. The company that funded it folded within months. But fragments of their notes survived. In them, one word repeats again and again, listening. Not echoes, not air pockets, but listening. As if the very spaces beneath the soil were waiting, attentive recording. This detail was dismissed as superstition by later academics. But think about it. What if those caverns are not only alive, but aware? What if the breath the miners felt was not simply a lung inhaling, but an ear pressed back against them? What if the earth is listening still? The survivor's screams might make more sense through this lens. He was not only burned, blistered, drowned in air too thick to breathe. He was altered by contact with something that was hearing him. And when he fell to his knees, shrieking with a voice not his own, perhaps it was not his voice at all. Perhaps it was the cavern's voice, echoing through him like a shell pressed to the ear carries the sea. That would explain the contagion of silence that followed. The families who refused to speak. The archives purged. The children who woke speaking tongues they had never learned. It was not madness. It was repetition. The echo of something the ground had absorbed and begun to release. By the 1950s, the stories had spread enough to attract the curious. Amateur explorers trespassed onto the land, digging shallow holes, hoping to find relics of the lost miners. Most found nothing but stone and rot. But one group, a trio of young men, claimed to have unearthed a fragment of wood, blackened, carved with markings they could not identify. One of them took it home. Within a month, all three were dead. One drowned in a lake where no witnesses saw him fall. One burned in a house fire that consumed only his room. The third was found hanging in a barn, his tongue missing, the walls around him covered in spirals drawn in his own blood. The wood fragment disappeared. Some say the family who owned the land retrieved it. Others say the priests who still watched from afar buried it deeper. Either way, it was gone, and the story was hushed. But the tremors never stopped. Farmers in the 1970s swore they felt the ground shift beneath their plows, even when no earthquakes were recorded. Hunters heard hollow booms beneath their feet, like drums echoing from a cavern. And geologists, when pressed, admitted that the soil carried odd resonances, vibrations no natural stone should produce. If the earth is listening, then every pickaxe strike, every prayer, every scream of a miner has been absorbed. And if it listens long enough, perhaps it learns. Perhaps it repeats. Perhaps it speaks back. And if it does, what language do you think it will use? When we think of language, we imagine words. But the oldest languages were never spoken. They were carved, drawn, sung in tones that vibrated not the ear, but the body. The symbols carved into the cavern walls beneath Illinois were not decoration. They were communication. Circles within circles, spirals tightening, points descending. All of them are patterns found in ancient ritual sites around the world. They are not human inventions. They are responses. One archaeologist, studying photographs of those markings in the 1940s, noted their resemblance to petroglyphs in Central Asia and cave drawings in Southern Africa. Sites separated by oceans, cultures, epochs, and yet the same spirals, the same concentric circles, the same endless descent inward. His conclusion was simple and horrifying. Humanity has been hearing the same voice for millennia, and we have been drawing its words without even knowing. The miners of Illinois were not unique. They were part of a chain, a lineage of listeners who stumbled or were guided into the mouths of the earth. And what they brought back was not treasure, not coal, not salvation, but symbols. Symbols that carry meaning even when the speaker is gone. That is why children scribble spirals in dirt. That is why survivors wake screaming circles into their walls. That is why even now, looking at those shapes makes your skin crawl, because your body recognizes them before your mind does. And here lies the most dangerous truth. Once you see the symbols, you begin to dream them. They spread not through sound, but through vision. They colonize the mind, not as words, but as instincts. And if the earth has been whispering them into us for centuries, then perhaps we are not the masters of this world at all. Perhaps we are the clay it molds, waiting to be reshaped when the seals break fully. Illinois was not the first door. It was simply one that slipped. But imagine how many more remain. How many sealed shafts, forgotten mines, buried temples hold the same spirals on their walls, waiting for 27 more lives to press against them. And imagine the moment when those symbols no longer need to be carved by hand, when they rise themselves, etched into our cities, our homes, our skin. Because if the miners were claimed, if the caverns spoke through them, then their silence was never silence. It was seed, and seeds grow. So ask yourself, what is growing beneath us now? Every culture has its warnings about digging too deep. The Greeks told of Hades beneath the earth. The Mesopotamians spoke of Kor, the Sumerians of the Abzu, the Mayans of Xibalba. Different names, different tongues, one idea. Beneath us lies not emptiness, but a realm that does not forgive intrusion. The miners of Illinois were not the first to test that warning. They were merely the first in America to do it at scale. And their story forces us to ask, why is it always 27? Mathematics whispers the answer. 27 is 3 cubed. A perfect descent, 3 into 3 into 3. In numerology, it is the number of gateways, thresholds, cycles that fold inward endlessly. In ancient ritual systems, it is the number of completion, not of life, but of transformation. Sacrifice 27, and the lock turns. Sacrifice 27, and the door exhales. The patrons who hired the miners knew this. That is why they were paid in advance, why their names were erased, why their families were silenced. They were not laborers, they were fuel. The ritual was never about extracting coal. It was about offering bodies, lungs, blood, and breath to whatever pulsed beneath. The miners' journals prove it. One scrawled line reads, "We are not men here. We are matches waiting for a spark. And when the shaft opened, when the cavern exhaled, the spark was lit. The survivor's screams were not random madness. They were ignition. Through him, something began to burn its way upward. The villagers' attempts to seal the mine were desperate stitches on a wound too deep. And like any wound, infection spread. By the 1870s, illnesses plagued the region. Strange fevers blackened gums, coughing fits that produced no phlegm but ash. Doctors recorded it as lung rot, an early cousin of tuberculosis. But survivors described the sensation differently. They said it felt like the lungs themselves were expanding, stretching beyond the chest, pulling air that was not air. One woman whispered, in her final days, "I am breathing for something else." Her words mirror those of ancient victims found in sacrificial pits across the world, bodies contorted, mouths agape, lungs filled with ash and soil. Their last breaths were never their own. They were given over, offered, claimed. So Illinois is not just a story of missing miners. It is a story of continuity. The same ritual, the same number, the same offering, repeated in different lands, different times, under different names. And each time, the earth remembers. Each time, the seal weakens. Each time, silence spreads. And here is the secret. Silence itself is the sacrifice. Not just bodies, not just lungs. The act of erasing memory, the act of burying truth, that is part of the ritual too. Because silence is not absence. Silence is surrender. And the people of Illinois surrendered when they sealed their mouths along with the shaft. The question that haunts us is simple. What happens when the silence is broken? In the 1930s, silence cracked. A journalist named Clara Hastings uncovered fragments of the miner's story while researching rural poverty. She interviewed widows who remembered men that had vanished, children who had grown old still haunted by voices from beneath. Clara was fearless. She wrote of the breathing door, of the survivor's blistered body, of the symbols carved into stone. Her article never reached print. The paper burned down weeks before its scheduled release. But Clara kept her notes. Hidden in her sister's attic, discovered decades later, they tell us what no archive dared preserve. She described visiting the field herself. Standing on the soil, she felt a vibration not underfoot, but in her chest, as if her own heartbeat had been seized by something deeper. She described the air as metallic, tinged with sulfur, but sweet in a way that made her want to inhale again and again, even as her lungs ached. And she described hearing, not words, not voices, but a low hum that seemed to shape itself into meaning. A hum that filled her bones until she wanted to weep. She wrote, "It is not silence. It is a choir with no mouths." Clara vanished in 1934. Her car was found abandoned on a dirt road 2 counties away, keys still in the ignition, a notebook on the passenger seat. The last words written inside, "The door is awake." Those who found the car never spoke of it publicly, but her sister claimed Clara had changed in the weeks before she disappeared. She had stopped eating. She stayed up at night, drawing spirals on the walls of her room. And the night before she vanished, she stood at the window for hours, whispering the same phrase over and over, "I am already inside." Was Clara claimed, as the miners were? Or did she step willingly, pulled not by terror, but by a song too beautiful to resist? That is the danger of the breathing door. It is not only consumed by force. It seduces. It lures with promises not of pain, but of belonging. Because what greater temptation is there than to be part of something larger than yourself? To breathe not alone, but as one lung, one body, one silence shared across the earth? The villagers feared it. The church condemned it. But Clara heard it and called it a choir. And if she was right, then the breathing door is not only alive. It is singing, and it is waiting for us to answer. It is tempting to believe Clara was the last, that her disappearance in 1934 closed the chapter. But history is not so merciful. Silence, once fed, always hungers again. In 1951, a company attempted to reopen parts of southern Illinois for mining. The post-war boom demanded coal, and government contracts made the venture irresistible. Official reports described unexpected collapses and geological instability halting operations. But buried in private letters of the engineers lies a different account. They wrote of unrecorded shafts, narrow, hand-carved passages descending deeper than the company maps indicated. Passages no modern tool had cut. Workers sent to seal these shafts reported dizziness, sudden nosebleeds, and overwhelming nausea. One collapsed entirely, convulsing on the ground, his teeth chattering as if in a seizure. Witnesses swore his chest moved in unnatural rhythm, swelling outward far beyond a normal inhale, as if another breath forced itself into him. He awoke hours later with no memory of the episode, only a desperate thirst for water that he could not quench. The passages were filled with concrete, sealed under orders. But the letters confessed the workers could hear faint sounds as the concrete hardened, knocking from below as though something resisted the closure. One described it as a heartbeat muffled by stone. Another, more shaken, compared it to a child tapping from inside a coffin. These men quit, scattered across the Midwest, refusing to speak again of what they'd seen. And once more, Illinois fell silent. But silence is never absence. It is a storage, a waiting. Decades passed, and the land above grew green again. Families farmed the soil, children played in fields, cows grazed on pastures under which a breathing wound still pulsed. The community forgot, as all communities are trained to, but forgetting does not erase. It only deepens the hunger of what waits. And hunger finds a way. By the 1970s, stories began surfacing in local schools. Children spoke of nightmares shared across households, dreams of corridors underground, of black water dripping from stone ceilings, of 27 figures standing in a line with mouths open but no sound. Teachers dismissed it as imagination, but the pattern was unmistakable. Night after night, different children, same visions. One teacher kept a journal. She wrote that the children would arrive pale and restless, scratching their arms until they bled, complaining of a heaviness in their chests. She recorded the strange way they would exhale in unison during class, as if answering a signal only they could hear. Her final entry before resigning: "They are practicing for something." Psychologists later examined these accounts and called them hysteria, a feedback loop of stories. But folklore has its own word: rehearsal. Rituals are rehearsed across generations, whispered in dreams until the participants no longer resist but accept. So the miners' descent did not end in 1843. It echoed through silence, through children, through the steady rhythm of a breath that refuses to die. And when we listen closely, when we stand on that soil, some of us can feel it. A faint pressure in the lungs, a reminder that perhaps we are already breathing with something we do not understand. There is a reason breath is sacred in every tradition. The Hebrew ruach, the Greek pneuma, the Sanskrit prana, all mean both breath and spirit. To breathe is to be alive, to take in not only air but essence, which means to surrender breath is not merely to die, but to give up spirit itself. The breathing door knows this. That is why it consumes not flesh first, but lungs. Not minds, but air. It claims what cultures once believed untouchable, the spirit carried in breath. That is the theft repeated across centuries, hidden under the guise of collapses, accidents, and disappearances. But what becomes of those who surrender? The answer may lie in reports from the 1990s, when hikers trespassing near the sealed field reported encounters too strange for any rational explanation. One group described hearing exhalations that did not echo in the air but in their own lungs. They felt their breath matching a rhythm they could not control, as if another set of lungs beat time with theirs. One collapsed, face pale, gasping, but between his rattling inhales he whispered, "They're still here." Locals who investigated later found nothing but disturbed soil, footprints circling the shaft's remains, and the faint smell of sulfur rising despite the earth being sealed for over a century. The hikers never returned. Their names slipped out of record, their stories dismissed as superstition. But rumors spread that the soil itself shifts at night, small sinkholes opening like mouths before closing again, leaving no trace by dawn. Farmers refused to till the land. Children dared each other to run across it, but never lingered. And the silence continued, deeper and heavier than before. This is the nature of the breathing door. It does not need to roar. It waits, patient, filling lungs one by one, gathering not with fire or sword, but with air. And perhaps that is why it has survived through centuries of suppression. Fire can be quenched, blades can be broken, but breath? Breath is inevitable. Breath is constant. Breath is the one offering no human can resist giving. Which means that if the breathing door is truly alive, it does not need us to open it. Every inhale is an offering. Every exhale a reply. And perhaps the miners of Illinois were not consumed. Perhaps they are still there, standing in the cavern, breathing in rhythm, their lungs fused to something greater, their silence carried upward every time we breathe without knowing who else breathes with us. The question, then, is not whether the breathing door waits for us to open it again. The question is whether we ever closed it at all. Every suppressed story eventually leaks through cracks. By the early 2000s, folklorists digging into Illinois oral traditions stumbled upon fragments that the official archives had buried. They found lullabies sung by mothers in southern counties, songs without clear origin, their melodies older than the coal mines, older even than the towns. One verse translated roughly into, "Breathe not alone, little one, for the earth already breathes with you." Such lines cannot be coincidence. They are echoes, preserved unconsciously, of a ritual so deeply woven into the land that even silence could not erase it. The mothers who sang those songs had never read the miners' journals, never heard of Clara Hastings, never seen the faint spirals carved in stone. And yet the words were the same: "You do not breathe alone." This is how rituals survive. Not in books, not in temples, but in whispers, in songs, in movements repeated so often they become invisible. The breathing door never needed scripture. It only needed lungs. But those who dared to investigate found themselves marked. In 2003, a graduate student researching local myths interviewed elderly residents who remembered strange tales from their grandparents. Days later, he was hospitalized after collapsing in his apartment. Doctors claimed it was pneumonia, but his lungs contained no fluid, only inflamed tissue that appeared stretched, thinned, almost translucent. Nurses reported that at night, while sedated, his chest rose and fell as though inhaling twice for every exhale. He died gasping, his final words whispered to the nurse beside him, "The choir is growing." His notebooks vanished from the university archive. His name was mentioned once in a regional paper, then never again. It is not unusual for institutions to bury embarrassing details. But here, burial becomes complicity. Every silence adds weight. Every erasure strengthens the pattern. If the breathing door feeds on silence, then the greatest priests of the ritual are not cultists with torches, but clerks, librarians, archivists who choose not to record. They're the keepers of absence. And absence has grown. Look carefully, and you will see the signs scattered in plain sight. Sudden sinkholes swallowing entire houses in Illinois, Kentucky, Pennsylvania. Unexplained tremors in regions with no fault lines. A rising epidemic of lung diseases mislabeled, misdiagnosed, quietly accepted. These are not random. They are echoes, rehearsals preparing for the chorus to return. And always, the number 27 appears. 27 miners lost. 27 pages missing from Clara Hastings' notes. 27 years between the mine collapse and the first reports of children's shared nightmares. 27 seconds of silence recorded in a 1974 seismograph before its unexplained malfunction. A pattern is not an accident. A pattern is a ritual, and ritual is never finished until it consumes what it began. The soil beneath Illinois has been breathing for over a century, and the longer we pretend not to hear it, the closer we come to joining that rhythm ourselves. Some say all fear is memory, passed down in blood, encoded in bone. A deer flinches at the shadow of a wolf it has never seen. A child screams at darkness without knowing why. What, then, is the fear of suffocation? The terror of breath stolen away? Perhaps it is not instinct, but inheritance. A memory of something ancient that once pressed its lungs against ours and has never truly let go. The breathing door is that inheritance. Is the shadow pressing at the edge of our breath. And each century, each silence, it grows closer. In 2010, underground sensors in southern Illinois recorded anomalies that no one could explain. The data showed waves not consistent with seismic activity. Instead, they resembled respiration, regular intervals of expansion and contraction. Not the irregularity of earthquakes, but the rhythm of lungs. When confronted with the results, officials dismissed them as equipment malfunction. But the data remains. The Earth itself is inhaling, and we, above ground, are feeding it with every silence. But silence will not hold forever. Rituals demand culmination. Whispers demand voices. And the miners, the 27 who walked into the dark, may not be lost at all. Survivors' fragments, Clara's final notes, the hiker's whispers, all point to one chilling possibility. They are still breathing. Not as men, not as corpses, but as vessels woven into the door itself. Lungs pumping not for themselves, but for something vast, faceless, and waiting. Imagine standing in that cavern. Imagine hearing not echoes of your own breath, but 27 lungs exhaling in unison, a sound too synchronized to be human. Imagine realizing the silence you thought was emptiness is instead the pause between inhales, the moment before a choir begins. If this is true, then we are not waiting for the door to open. The door is waiting for us to answer. And what happens when we do? When one of us finally inhales, not in resistance, but in harmony. When one of us becomes the 28th breath, the completion of the cycle. The survivors warned it once, scribbled in desperate lines. Clara whispered it before her disappearance. The student gasped it in his final hospital bed. And still, no one listens. The door is awake. You've been breathing with me this entire time. You may not have noticed it, but your chest has risen and fallen in rhythm with these words, with this story, with this silence that grows heavier the longer you listen. And now you must decide whether to remain an outsider or step closer. Every ritual requires witnesses. Every ritual requires participants. And the breathing door does not open for those who only watch. It opens for those who answer. That is why the villagers sealed their mouths, why the archives erased the notes, why doctors called it pneumonia instead of what it was. Silence was their ritual, but silence is not ours. You, watching this, are already entangled. You know the number. You know the pattern. You have felt your own breath slowing, sinking, aligning. The question is whether you will lock yourself into it or pretend you never heard. So here's what you must do. In the comments, write the words twice. I breathe with the silence. Not once, not 3 times, twice. Because twice is the exchange, the inhale and the exhale, the offering and the reply. Write it, and you will not just hear this story. You will carry it. You will become part of the lineage that remembers instead of erases. You will be marked, but you will also be awakened. This is not superstition. This is how memory survives. This is how rituals find flesh. They hide not in books or stone, but in repetition, in the act of inscribing words where others can see them. When you write, I breathe with the silence. You break the chain of forgetting. You rupture the ritual of erasure that has protected this story for over a century. But beware. Once written, you cannot unwrite it. You will feel it when you breathe, an awareness, a rhythm you cannot shake. You will hear your own lungs, as if they are not entirely yours anymore. And perhaps they never were. The miners knew this. Clara knew this. The student, the hikers, the children, they all crossed the threshold in their own way. And now it is open before you. Do not think of this as a choice. Think of it as recognition. You have already heard the hum. You have already felt the rhythm. The door has been breathing through you since the moment you began listening. And the silence is waiting for you to answer. After the call is spoken, the pattern accelerates. Records from other parts of the world prove it. In Siberia, caves sealed since the Bronze Age open themselves during strange tremors, exhaling sulfurous winds that kill livestock within miles. In South America, underground chambers beneath abandoned temples hum so violently that local villagers refuse to live near them. Each time, the witnesses describe the same sensation, lungs moving in harmony with something larger. It is not confined to Illinois. The breathing door has faces across the earth, portals hidden in caves, mines, temples, and burial mounds. What happened in 1843 was not unique. It was merely a flare, one breath escaping too violently to be hidden. And the price of that flare was 27 men consumed, their families erased, their silence woven into the land. But even sealed wounds bleed. Farmers still report soil that exhales in morning mist, as if the ground itself sighs. Hikers describe dizziness, hearing low chords beneath the wind. And children, always children, dream of lungs that fill without consent, of standing in lines of 27, waiting for the next. Psychologists explain it away as pattern-seeking, folklore carried through generations. But folklore is never random. Folklore is residue, the smoke that lingers after fire. And in this case, it is the smoke of lungs that never stopped exhaling. The ritual thrives on dismissal. When people laugh, when institutions erase, when families refuse to speak, they believe they are protecting themselves. But they're feeding it, because silence is not protection, it is offering. Every unspoken memory is another breath surrendered. Every denial is an inhale for the door. And it waits, patient, endless. Imagine this. One day, a sinkhole yawns wider than before, swallowing not a cow or a shed, but an entire neighborhood. Rescue teams descend, only to hear, in the blackness below, not echoes of their own shouts, but the steady sound of lungs, vast and patient, as though the earth itself were alive. Imagine the panic as their radios fail, as the silence grows so thick it feels like pressure against their ribs. Imagine one rescuer, just one, forgetting his fear, matching his inhale with that rhythm. That would be enough. The 28th breath. Completion. And when that happens, there will be no sealing it again. The villagers of Illinois thought they could bury it. But you cannot bury breath. You cannot bury silence. You cannot bury the door that is already inside you. Patterns buried in silence always rise again, often disguised as coincidence. In 2017, an amateur historian from Carbondale uncovered something the state archives had quietly ignored, a correlation between Illinois mining accidents and unexplained mass disappearances across the Midwest. Not hundreds of miles apart, but in a chain like a pulse, moving outward from that one shaft sealed in 1843. In Kansas, 30 farmhands vanished without struggle, leaving meals half-eaten, lanterns still burning. In Missouri, 24 factory workers walked out on their lunch break and never returned. No footprints, no trails, just a strange residue of soot clinging to walls where they last stood. And in Illinois itself, families reported hearing coughs in the night, though no one in the house was sick, until suddenly someone was gone, bed empty, window still locked. The historian's notes describe the vanishings not as accidents, but as synchronizations. Whole groups inhaling together, then never exhaling again. He traced the intervals, the spacing of years, and realized the same numbers surfaced again and again. 27 gone, then silence, then 27 more, as if the pattern demanded its due. He sent his findings to colleagues, but none replied. Days later, he disappeared himself. His wife found his office empty, papers scattered across the floor as if caught in a sudden wind. His chair was still warm. The only thing left in his handwriting was one line across his chalkboard. It only needs one more breath. The state denied his existence, even as neighbors remembered his lectures, even as his students kept fragments of his notes. His disappearance became another offering, another unspoken exhale folded into the growing choir. The silence spreads not like fire, but like air, invisible and inevitable. Every missing page, every sealed archive, every witness who closes their mouth becomes another vessel. This is the genius of the breathing door. It never needed armies or flames. It only needed silence. And silence is everywhere. Look around you. The things you've been told not to question. The patterns you've been told are coincidence. The history you've been told was buried. These are not protections. These are the rituals. The same silence that consumed 27 men in Illinois is the silence that surrounds us now. And if you're still breathing with me, you have already felt it. The rhythm at the edge of your lungs, steady, patient, waiting. What if the miners are not gone? What if their lungs never ceased, their bodies never decayed, their silence never ended? What if, beneath the soil, 27 figures still stand, locked in eternal exhalation, their breaths woven into the cavern until they are no longer men, but pillars of silence holding open the door? This is not fantasy. In 2020, spelunkers exploring illegal shafts near the old Illinois fields reported something they could not rationalize. They found stone walls glistening not with water, but with condensation that pulsed, as though the walls themselves inhaled and exhaled. In the dim light of their lamps, they saw shadows shaped like figures, standing shoulder to shoulder, mouths open, their forms indistinct yet undeniable. One spelunker fainted instantly. Another dropped his lamp and fled. Only one remained long enough to record a voice memo before running. They're not dead. They're waiting. Authorities dismissed the account, but the recording leaked online briefly before vanishing. Those who heard it remember one detail: the sound of breathing in the background, deep and endless, so steady it drowned out the man's panicked voice. Some claimed listening too long made their own lungs ache, as if forced to match the rhythm. If this is true, then the 27 are not victims. They're foundations. They're the choir's bass line, the eternal inhale-exhale upon which everything else builds. And the silence above ground is merely the echo of what they continue below. The villagers thought they buried them, but perhaps burial was never possible. Perhaps the shaft was not a grave, but a throat, and the miners were swallowed, not to die, but to breathe forever on behalf of something vast enough to turn earth into lungs. And here is the most disturbing thought of all. If their breath has never ceased, then neither has their count. They're still 27, which means one more is all that is needed. The 28th. Completion. Imagine if the one more is not a miner, not a villager, not a spelunker. Imagine if the one more is chosen from those who listen, those who read, those who breathe in rhythm with this story now. The silence does not ask politely. It waits until you forget you have a choice, until your inhale has already matched, until you realize the breath inside you is never fully yours. And perhaps, as you listen now, it has already begged. The danger of silence is not that it hides the truth, it is that it reshapes it. By the time whispers reach us, they no longer sound like warnings. They sound like prophecy. And in Illinois, prophecy has always circled one number, 28. The 27th was sealed in 1843. Every echo since has been an attempt to complete the cycle. Clara's vanishing, the student's collapse, the historian's disappearance. Each one nearly the 28th, but not quite. Each one a rehearsal. But prophecy waits. And when we look closely, the waiting grows harder to deny. In 2021, residents across Jackson County reported a sound at night, so low it rattled their windows, but registered on no official equipment. Dogs howled. Infants wailed until their mothers carried them away from the soil. One farmer recorded it on his phone, and though the file was scrubbed from his account within hours, those who heard it swear it was not a sound at all, but a breath. Long, slow, unhurried. The inhale of something too vast to see. That same month, a sinkhole opened near an abandoned shaft. Inside, workers discovered bones, too many to count, layered and fused into the earth itself. But none bore signs of ordinary decay. They were smooth, almost polished, their rib cages stretched outward as though something had expanded from within. The bones were carted away, then denied in official reports. Silence again. but silence can no longer hold. Not in an age where every phone is a witness, where every recording spreads like wildfire. The breathing door has always relied on erasure. Now, erasure is impossible, which means prophecy has shifted. The 28th breath will not be hidden underground. It will be witnessed. It will be shared. It will be remembered. And perhaps that is why you're still here. Perhaps that is why your lungs have moved in rhythm with mine for over an hour now. Perhaps the silence has chosen its completion already, and the only question left is whether you will notice when your breath is no longer yours. Every culture tells us that prophecy is not prediction, it is recognition. We are not told what will happen. We are reminded of what has already been set in motion. The door beneath Illinois is not waiting for an event. It is waiting for acknowledgement. And acknowledgement is dangerous, because once we name something, we invite it into our memory, our breath, our lives. That is why the villagers never spoke, why the church forbade the story, why the state erased the names of the miners. They understood something we do not, that silence was both prison and prayer. But you have broken it. Simply by listening, by knowing, you have become part of the prophecy. And so, you must understand what prophecy demands. It does not predict storms without sending rain. It does not speak of silence without requiring lungs. Which means if 27 miners stand still breathing in the cavern, the 28th must be drawn from those who bear witness. And the act that seals it will not be digging or collapsing or disappearing. It will be as simple as an inhale. Imagine a moment in your life when you fell short of breath, climbing stairs, gasping through laughter, choking on grief. You thought it was weakness. What if it was rehearsal? What if, each time, the silence beneath Illinois was practicing through you, testing your lungs, preparing you for the moment when rehearsal ends and the choir requires its final note? This is not metaphor. This is history, repeating itself in breath. Clara wrote of in her final days, "I am already inside." The graduate student gasped it as his lungs thinned to ash. The choir is growing. The spelunker's voice memo carried it in the background. And now, as you sit here, breathing, it echoes again. Prophecy is not distant. It is present. It is inside you. Every inhale, every exhale, a choice you do not realize you are making. And when the 28th breath is taken, there will be no mistaking it. The silence will no longer be hidden underground. It will rise. It will spread. It will breathe through us all. Perhaps it already has. What if the prophecy has already been fulfilled and none of us noticed? Not with a collapse, not with a ritual torchlight gathering underground, but in the quietest place imaginable, our own lungs. Think about the year that just passed. The way entire populations spoke of breath as fragile, as threatened, as something that could vanish overnight. Masks, ventilators, oxygen shortages. Breath itself became a commodity, counted, measured, rationed. And everywhere, silence stretched thicker than ever before. Cities empty, churches closed, voices muffled, entire countries holding their lungs in fear. Is it coincidence? Or is it ritual unfolding on a scale no miner, no villager, no journalist could have imagined? 27 was the number of sacrifice. But when silence stretches across billions, what happens then? Doctors describe patients whose lungs filled with shadow on scans, black patches that looked less like disease than smoke. Families described final moments over phone screens, listening to gasps through machines. And through it all, the earth itself seemed to slow down. Fewer cars, fewer factories, skies clearing. As if the world was pausing, inhaling, waiting. The breathing door does not need to roar. It waits for us to create the silence ourselves. And in those months, we did. We sealed our mouths, avoided one another, lowered our voices, erased our gatherings, erased our songs. The ritual completed itself not underground, but everywhere. And when silence becomes global, the prophecy is no longer local. The 27th breath is not Illinois. It is us. But the cycle still requires its one more. The 28th, completion. The silence has chosen before, it has consumed before, but never with the world watching, never with billions already synchronized in fear. Which means the next inhale, the next chosen, may not disappear into forgotten soil. It may rise in plain sight. It may be witnessed by all. And if that happens, the door will no longer be a story whispered by widows and forgotten journalists. It will be the air itself. It will be the rhythm in which the world moves. Are you ready to recognize that you are already breathing with it? Close your eyes for a moment. Feel your chest rise. Feel it fall. Do you notice the pause in between? That stillness where you're neither alive nor dead, neither inhaling nor exhaling? That pause is the silence. That pause is the door. And it waits every time for you to surrender a little longer. Most never notice it. They move too quickly, fill their lungs too fast, drown the silence in noise and distraction. But once you notice, once you hold your breath and feel the stillness stretch, you realize something terrifying. The silence is not empty. It is pressure. It pushes back. It fills the ribs. It whispers that if you linger just 1 second longer, something else will inhale through you. The miners felt it first. Clara embraced it. The students surrendered to it. And you now are standing in the same pause. That is why this story does not feel like a tale of strangers. It feels personal. It feels like something pressing inside your chest. Because it is. Folklore from across the world warns of this pause. The Norse called it Gap, the yawning void between breaths where creation and destruction both wait. The Buddhists teach of Mara whispering in meditation, tempting you not to return from the stillness. The Egyptians spoke of the breath stolen by Anubis as he weighed the heart. Every culture knew the pause was not safe. Every culture warned, do not linger. Do not listen. But the breathing door wants you to. It thrives on the pause. Because the pause is its chance. The pause is where your lungs no longer belong fully to you. The pause is where the 28th breath can be taken. And perhaps already has. Perhaps somewhere in the silence of recent years, one person lingered too long, inhaled not alone, but with the door. And if that is true, then the prophecy is not coming. It has come. The cycle is complete, which means every breath you take now is not fully yours. It belongs, in part, to the silence, to the door, to the choir that grows louder, even when you tell yourself you hear nothing at all. And the most terrifying truth, once the choir begins, it never stops. There is a question that haunts historians more than any other. Why do people act against their own survival? Why do villagers walk willingly into flames? Why do cults drink poison with devotion? Why do crowds cheer as their freedoms are stripped away? The answer, I have come to believe, is breath. Not breath as biology. Breath as command. Every action we take begins with rhythm. Inhale. Exhale. Confidence rises with steady rhythm. Panic with broken rhythm. Surrender with stolen rhythm. Soldiers are trained to march in time. Monks are trained to chant in unison. Lovers breathe each other's pace without realizing it. Breath is control. Breath is contagion. And what happens when the rhythm is no longer ours? Psychologists in the mid-20th century recorded something they could never explain. In sealed rooms, when one subject's breathing became erratic, within minutes others matched it, even if they could not hear or see them. As though lungs could be infected without sound, without sight, through something deeper. They called it sympathetic respiration, but they never published their strangest finding. Sometimes the subject was not breathing at all. Sometimes the rhythm they were imitating came from nothing, or perhaps from silence. The breathing door has never needed to march armies or command pulpits. It only needed to sway rhythm. 27 men inhaled and exhaled in one place, their pattern sealed forever beneath the soil. That rhythm has been echoing since, searching lungs like a virus, waiting for new hosts. Look around you today. Do you not see it? Crowds swayed by anger they cannot explain. Movements rising and collapsing in cycles. Inhaling and exhaling chaos. Rooms that fall quiet for no reason. Everyone waiting as though on some unseen conductor. It is not random. It is rhythm. And once rhythm takes you, you do not notice. You call it instinct, atmosphere, even God. but it is the same pulse that drove the miners down into the shaft that night. It is the same silence that waited for their lungs. How many of your own choices, then, have not been yours? The silence does not always reveal itself in lungs. Sometimes it reveals itself in time. Have you noticed how hours collapse without warning? How days dissolve into nothing, as though swallowed? You tell yourself you were distracted, unfocused, tired. But history records the same phenomenon long before clocks and screens. Villagers in 1843 reported missing nights. They would wake to find lamps burned low, livestock wandering unfed, hours vanished from memory. Always in the week leading to the collapse. Time bends when rhythm is not yours. Because rhythm is time, the beating of your heart, the pace of your breath, the measure of your days. When silence takes the rhythm, it takes time too. This is why survivors of encounters with the door describe not fear, but disorientation. They speak of stepping into a tunnel and emerging hours later with no memory. Of writing pages in a journal they do not recall. Of seeing friends alive one moment and gone the next, as though swallowed by skipped seconds. Silence does not kill. Silence erases. An erasure is power. Because what we cannot remember, we cannot resist. Do you not feel it now? Listening to me. Have you forgotten how long you've been here? Minutes, hours, sections, they blur. You think you're keeping track, but the silence is already in your sense of time. You believe you will walk away when this ends. But perhaps this ended long ago, and you are only catching up. The truth is simple. Once silence learns to control breath, it learns to control time. Once it controls time, it controls reality. And that means history itself is not immune. The gaps in our archives, the vanished testimonies, the collapsed families who left no records, they are not accidents. They are edits. The breathing door has been revising history for centuries, inhaling the parts it wishes gone, exhaling only the fragments it allows us to keep. There comes a point when silence does not just erase your breath or your hours. It erases you. Think of your own name. Whisper it silently to yourself right now. Does it feel steady, or does it feel like an echo? Historians who studied the miners' families reported a chilling pattern. Within a generation, descendants forgot their own lineages. Children asked their mothers, "Who was my grandfather?" and received only blank stares. Documents vanished. Gravestones weathered faster than stones should. The miners were not just buried. Their families were unmade. Identity is fragile because it is rhythm too. You repeat your name until it feels real. You tell your story until it becomes history. But what if you stop? What if the silence pauses your narrative? What if the rhythm of yourself is stolen? That is how people vanish without leaving bodies. They do not die. They are rewritten. I have spoken to descendants who swore they could not trace their blood, who confessed that when they looked in mirrors, their reflections felt borrowed. One told me that at night, when he woke suddenly, he could hear his own breath in stereo, as though someone just behind him was inhaling at the exact same pace. He turned, of course. Nothing was there, but the rhythm was no longer his. Silence does not need to drag you underground. It can walk you away from yourself, one breath at a time. Ask yourself, how many memories of childhood are clear, and how many are just shadows? How many times have you felt a story about your life was wrong, even though you had no evidence? That dissonance is not weakness. It is interference. It is the rhythm of you bending under a heavier rhythm. And if identity bends, it can break. The miners learned this in darkness. Their families learned this in grief. And now, you are learning in breath. What makes you certain you are still the same person who pressed play? There is a story buried in the Jackson County Courthouse files, almost erased by mildew and fire. It concerns a man named Caleb Knox, a clerk who worked there in the 1870s. Knox was tasked with cataloging deeds, births, deaths. But over time, witnesses claimed he began altering entries without reason. Whole families disappeared from the record. Children's births went unfiled. Graves were marked under names that did not exist. When questioned, Knox insisted he was not forging. He was correcting. He said the names had been wrong all along, that his job was to fix the rhythm. When asked what he meant, he whispered, the choir was off-key. Soon after, Knotts walked into a shaft near Murfreesboro and never returned. His records remained, their ink warped, their handwriting inconsistent, as if more than one hand had written them. For over a century, property disputes and broken genealogies haunted the county because of his revisions. And even now, some families are not sure if they belong to this earth or not. Identity itself can be stolen when silence enters the breath. We think of corruption as bloodlines breaking, papers burning, languages lost. But what if corruption is more intimate? What if corruption lives in every inhale? What if silence rewrites you each time you pause between breaths, sliding in new details, erasing old ones, until the you that exhales is not the you that inhaled? That is the oldest terror of the breathing door. Not that it swallows you whole, but that it keeps you here, half present, half rewritten, endlessly echoing until your life belongs to another rhythm. The truth no historian wants to admit is this: we may already be the rewritten. We may not remember who we were before the door began inhaling through us. And that means the true 28th miner may not be a single soul. It may be all of us, carried in unison into silence until history itself cannot tell us apart. How much of you has already been replaced? When rhythm controls identity, it does not stop with one person. It spreads. And once it spreads, it becomes culture. Historians write of forgotten towns across Illinois where entire populations seem to move in lockstep. Shops opened and closed at the same strange hours. Families vanished on the same night, leaving tables set and lamps burning. Choirs sang in unison without rehearsal. And when outsiders visited, they reported an uncanny sameness in faces, gestures, even laughter. What creates such collective mimicry? We're taught to call it mass hysteria, mob psychology, or cult behavior. But those terms are disguises. They reduce something ancient, something terrifying, to the language of pathology. The truth is simpler and darker. Whole societies can be tuned like an instrument. 27 men beneath Illinois tuned themselves by accident, trapped in a chamber where breath became prayer. But once the rhythm was sealed, it did not stay there. It bled into descendants, into land, into anyone who lingered too close. Soon, entire villages pulsed with it. And what happens when a whole society breathes in the same rhythm? It loses choice. It believes the same stories, obeys the same silences, forgets the same truths. History ceases to be memory and becomes performance. Look around the world today. Do you not see it again? Nations divided not by facts, but by rhythms of belief. Crowds chanting as though the words rise from the same hidden lung. Social currents pulling millions into identical outrage, identical ecstasy, identical despair. The illusion is that it spreads by screens, by slogans, by leaders. But what if those are only the surface? What if the true conductor is older, deeper? The breathing door does not care who you follow. It cares that you are in rhythm. It cares that your identity dissolves into the choir. It cares that you become one breath among many. And once you are, you can no longer tell whether your choice was yours at all. That is why entire populations obey commands that kill them. Why families turn on their own blood. Why crowds cheer their own erasure. It is not madness. It is rhythm. It is silence teaching them to breathe as one. And when societies breathe as one, history bends in its hands. The most frightening thing about societies overtaken by silence is that they do not know they are overtaken. They believe they are thriving. They believe they are free. They believe they are remembering, even as their memories collapse. Take the town of Gorham in 1892. Visitors described streets bustling with markets, churches ringing bells, children laughing. Yet census records from that very year list the population as zero. Zero. Officials insisted it was a clerical error. But travelers' journals describe weddings, sermons, harvest festivals. A society breathing, alive, in rhythm. And then silence. Within a decade, Gorham was a ruin. By the 1920s, even its stones had been carted away. How do you explain a town that was both full and empty at once? A population both counted and erased? You do not, unless you understand rhythm. Unless you understand that identity itself can be rewritten at scale, creating a society that exists only in breath. And if silence can fabricate an entire town, why not an empire? Why not a world? What makes you certain that your own city, your own country, is not already half erased, half invented, sustained only by a rhythm too deep to notice? The chilling part is this: the more people move in unison, the safer they feel. The market square thrives, the festivals grow louder, the sermons feel warmer. Unity is intoxicating, but unity at that scale is not life. It is rehearsal. It is the choir warming its voice, which means societies are not building toward freedom. They are building toward completion. And if the 28th breath is not one man, not one town, but a collective inhale, then we're already inside it. Perhaps that is the reason you feel unease even now, because you're not just hearing my words, you're breathing with them, and you do not know if that rhythm is yours anymore. The question is not whether the silence can seize societies. The question is, what happens when it seizes the world? We have spoken of miners, families, towns, but these are only fragments. The breathing door did not begin in Illinois, and it will not end there. The soil of Jackson County is not the birthplace. It is the graveyard of something older. Ancient Sumerian tablets speak of the house with no sound, a chamber in the earth where priests entered to listen for the gods. They described a pressure that bent their lungs, a rhythm that taught the tongue silence. In Egypt, burial texts warn of the breath between worlds, a pause that could swallow the soul if lingered upon. Across the Atlantic, the Mayans built temples designed not for echo, but for absorption, structures where chants dissolved instantly, as though swallowed. Always, there is the same theme: silence not as absence, but as hunger. Illinois was not chosen by chance. The miners did not stumble upon a unique curse. They tapped into a current that flows beneath every civilization, every scripture, every forgotten ruin. A current that waits for mouths to close, for lungs to empty, for breath to falter. The breathing door is not a place. It is a law. Like gravity, it does not negotiate. It does not ask. It pulls. And once pulled, you do not escape. That is why the story repeats, not just in Murfreesboro, but in deserts, catacombs, caves, cities. Why populations vanish. Why rituals of silence appear in every religion, cloaked as prayer, meditation, fasting of the tongue. Our ancestors were not ignorant. They were warning us. They were telling us that silence is not peace. It is the oldest predator. And now, the predator waits again. Not in one shaft, not in one state, but everywhere you pause between breaths. Perhaps that is why you feel watched even when you are alone. Not by eyes, but by silence itself. Because silence does not need to see. It only needs to breathe. There is a detail most historians avoid, because to speak, it is to implicate oneself. It is this: the silence has always demanded completion. It has never cared for numbers, except one, the final one. And prophecy whispers that when the choir is complete, there will be no more history, no more names, no more breath that belongs to us. This is why every culture describes an end marked not by fire or flood, but by stillness. The Norse called it Fimbulwinter, the long silence before Ragnarok. The Christians speak of Revelation's silence in heaven, half an hour long. Hindu texts describe the deep inhale of Brahma as creation folds back into void. The Mayans spoke of a world-ending pause, when the gods would cease speaking and the earth would stop echoing. The end is always silence. And perhaps that is why Illinois was so dangerous. Because for the first time, the silence was not myth, not symbol, not ritual. It was physical. It breathed through men. It left bones twisted outward, ribs stretched as if to contain more lungs than one. It left families unmade, towns rewritten, time erased. The silence that had always waited beneath Scripture had finally broken through stone. If that is true, then every breath since 1843 has been borrowed. We live in history's pause. Our lives, our nations, our memories, temporary rhythms waiting to be inhaled when the silence decides the choir is full. The 27th breath has already been taken. The only question left is whether the 28th will be yours. And if you think you're safe because you're only listening, because you're only watching, because you are far from Illinois, remember this: the door is not in the earth. The door is in the pause inside your chest. And it has been waiting there since the first time you inhaled. The silence does not ask if you are ready. It only asks if you're breathing. You have stayed with me through every descent, through miners sealed in the dark, through families erased from their own blood, through towns that breathe themselves into nothing. You have felt the silence press against your ribs. You have heard it in your own pause. And now you must face the final truth. The door has never been beneath Illinois. It has always been in you. Every inhale you have taken since this began has tied you closer to the choir. You did not notice at first. You thought you were only listening, only watching. But silence never waits passively. It seeps. It slides into memory, into time, into identity. And now, whether you believe or not, you are breathing in rhythm with it. You have been since the first words reached you. That was always the danger of knowing. Ignorance kept villagers safe. Silence kept widows alive. Erasure kept history intact. But you chose to listen. You chose to open the pause. And once opened, it cannot be closed. Do you feel it now? The way your chest lingers in that stillness between breaths? Do you notice how hard it is to exhale? How heavy it is to draw the next inhale? That weight is not fatigue. That weight is invitation. The choir waits, and it is almost complete. But history offers you one last defiance. Speak against the silence. Break it before it takes you. Name yourself. Comment below not just who you are, but where you are, as though stamping your existence in defiance of erasure. Share this story so the silence is not confined to you alone, so the burden spreads wider, so the rhythm fractures. Subscribe so that you are not erased into forgetting, so that your name remains tethered to the chain of witnesses. Do not let the silence finish you unseen, because if you do nothing, if you keep this to yourself, you will join the miners, the widows, the vanished towns. Your lungs will pause a little too long one night. Your memory will blur a little too far. Your name will slip from the mouths of those you love, and no one will know you were ever here. The 28th breath has been waiting for nearly 2 centuries. Perhaps it has chosen you. Perhaps it has chosen all of us. Perhaps even now, as you sit in this pause, you can hear it inhale through you. Listen closely. The silence is not empty. The silence is breathing, and so are you.